Can good people become evil? And can evil people become good? Are good and evil interchangeable? Or in some cases, are people both good and evil? You may be familiar with the biblical story of Lucifer, God's favourite angel who was sent to hell after he rebelled. Lucifer then became Satan, who has come to personify evil. Unfortunately, anyone, even regular law-abiding citizens, can turn to evil under certain circumstances. Various factors can be responsible for drawing out evil behaviours, causing ordinary people to become monsters. Throughout history, the question has been asked, are people born good or bad, or does an individual's circumstances influence them more than their own nurtured personality? This compelling argument is best epitomised in the world-renowned Stanford prison experiment, one of the most famous psychological experiments of all time. In the summer of 1971, American social psychologist and professor at Stanford University, Philip Zimbardo, converted the basement of Stanford University's Jordan Hall into a mock prison and selected 24 regular college students to take part in an experiment where they were randomly assigned the roles of either prisoner or guard, or more precisely, correction officer. Those who were selected to be a prisoner were even mock arrested by real police officers. The purpose of the experiment was to examine whether the brutal behaviour commonly reported amongst America's prison guards was due to the sadistic personalities of the guards themselves, or whether the corrupting influence of the prison environment caused the guards' behaviour. The students did not know each other prior to the study and were offered $15 per day to participate in the experiment. Zimbardo deliberately picked the most physically and mentally stable students and carefully avoided picking students with a history of antisocial behaviour. The experiment was originally planned to last 2 weeks, but Zimbardo had to terminate it after just 6 days due to the excessive aggression of the chosen guards and the subsequent emotional breakdown of some of the prisoners. After less than 6 days, the guards became abusive and some of the prisoners began to show signs of extreme distress and angst. The prisoners were constantly insulted and demeaned by being asked to carry out pointless and boring tasks, as well as being generally dehumanized. 3 of the prisoners became so traumatized by the whole experience that they had to be released early from the experiment, and some of the other prisoners even staged a rebellion against the spiteful guards. All participants were observed and videotaped by the experimenters, and their behaviour became the prime example of how a corrupting social context can negatively influence and transform human behaviour, in some cases, to an extreme extent. Zimbardo ensured that the chosen students were initially good apples, and were then corrupted by the unscrupulous power of the bad barrel, the prison environment. The experiment was designed to underpin his theory that people's behaviour is subject to the situation they find themselves in. The renowned psychologist examined this phenomenon in his book, The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil, where he discussed the line separating good from evil and analysed what could make good people do bad things, and how even those with a strong moral code can end up acting immorally. The Lucifer Effect explains how people are drawn to the dark side, and how situational forces and group dynamics can work together to make monsters out of otherwise decent human beings. Zimbardo also referred to the psychologist Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment, whereby, on the orders of an authority figure, volunteer subjects had been prepared to administer powerful electric shocks to strangers answering questions behind a screen, even to those strangers that the volunteers had been told had a pre-existing heart condition.
Volts, 135, and it's a woman. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one.
Milgram's psychological experiment confirmed the impact that authority figures can have on determining the actions of their subordinates, with subordinates feeling a sense of diminished responsibility for their own harmful actions if they were simply following orders. As psychologist Solomon Asch also theorized, Certain social pressures can drive people to engage in behaviours that may go against their own moral code. Humans often act like the people around them in certain situations to avoid standing out. The threat of being cast out of the group can lead us to do virtually anything to avoid this terrifying rejection. This is believed to be an evolutionary trait carried over from our tribe-dwelling ancestors. In modern life, however, this trait seems alive and well. Have you yourself ever experienced such a situation where you followed the crowd and ended up doing something you thought was wrong and regretted it later on? In 2003, during the US invasion of Iraq, some of the troops at Baghdad's Abu Ghraib prison subjected Iraqi prisoners to all kinds of abuse and even tortured them. There were also claims that US psychologists were involved in the abuse as they were collaborating with the government in the search for the most effective interrogation techniques. The behavioural similarities to Zimbardo's prison experiment were clear, although the Abu Ghraib guards committed much more heinous acts of abuse and physical torture. Just like in the Stanford experiment though, the situation led the US guards to act in an evil and sadistic manner by insulting the prisoners' religious beliefs, depriving them of sleep, and psychologically manipulating them. Zimbardo got involved in the US guards' trial and highlighted the psychological causes behind such disturbing behavioural metamorphoses. He also wrote an opinion piece for the Boston Globe, stating that, unless we learn the dynamics of why, we will never be able to counteract the powerful forces that can transform ordinary people into evil perpetrators. The American psychologists replaced the long-standing concept of the bad apple with that of the bad barrel, meaning that the social setting and the system itself can poison and corrupt the individual, rather than the other way round. The situational factors, contextual social dynamics, and underlying psychological pressure can feed the evil that can take root in any of us. We all carry the seed of evil in us, whether we like it or not. Another famous example of such a theory is the infamous 1692 Salem witch trials, where the Massachusetts community were gripped by an outbreak of religious fanaticism and collective hysteria. This led to more than 200 people being accused of witchcraft. Of the accused, 30 people were found guilty, and 19 of those found guilty were executed by hanging for the crime of witchcraft. The tragic Salem witch trials left a painful legacy in American history and continues to directly and indirectly inspire many movies and TV series. Despite being criticized for being unethical, the 1971 Stanford prison experiment has become a cornerstone of modern social psychology theory, and has also inspired writers and film directors, with movies such as 2010's The Experiment. In Zimbardo's book, The Lucifer Effect, which was published more than 30 years after the famous prison experiment, Zimbardo argues that good and evil coexist in the same person, and that the circumstances around us will dictate which one will prevail. This coexistence reminds us of the Chinese philosophical concept of yin and yang, which describes opposite forces which are interconnected, the black dot being the evil in good, and the white dot representing the good in evil. Psychologists argue that virtually anyone can be aggressive if sufficiently provoked, stressed, or disgruntled. By knowing better how circumstances can influence us, can we foster a positive environment to make sure that good wins out, or is evil inevitably going to emerge?